So this morning, we continue the story of Joshua, and last week we left off around chapter 6, which was God's people, the Israelites, going to conquer Jericho, which was really their first action once they have crossed the river. So that was their first thing to do once they had actually gotten on the side of the river they were supposed to be on and gotten about the work that God had called them to. And that had both gone well and not well for them. So if you read the intervening chapters, what you're going to read about is that the Israelites did what they were supposed to do. They marched around and the walls came down and all of that. But then God gave them some other instructions. And one of the instructions was about what they were allowed to take and not allowed to take from the city. And of course, people being people, and the Israelites not being perfect, and if we don't know anything by now, after their 40 years of wandering in the desert, the Israelites are not perfect and liked to only follow half of the instructions, right? I think any of our school teachers know this at this point, right? You're like, why didn't you follow all the instructions? Anyway, and so they do something they weren't supposed to do. They take stuff they weren't supposed to take, and so God gets mad at them, and they have a little bit of a setback when they go to the next town that they're supposed to go to, but eventually it does get rectified. Now, why is this? Why? And Joshua starts to get concerned. And Joshua is concerned about God's people, and he's concerned, not that they can't do what they need to do. They've been okay. They've had victories in coming and occupying the land. The problem that Joshua sees is a concern about maybe these folks are forgetting who they are. And it's easy to understand why that could be. This moment, right, the parting of the Red Sea and walking over it moment, was none of those people, if you recall, are there now, right? And it was 40 years before this. And so the people who had originally been given this vision for God for what they were supposed to do, the people who were originally given, the slaves in Egypt that were originally given this vision for going and leaving and being somewhere else and being able to be free and go about building the thing that God wants them to build, that vision, those people are a long time ago. And while the people that are there now have no doubt heard it and heard the stories, no doubt heard it and were there for some of the wanderings in the desert for sure, they didn't quite have and hadn't quite seen and didn't quite possess the same level of understanding, the same vision, the same experience that those original people did. And so even though they've had victory, even though they have had the thing, even though they've had success in what they were doing, Joshua decides to do something very interesting, which is to take a pause from all of the adventure and all the goings-on, and take them up on a mountain and remind them who they are. And how Joshua chooses to remind them how they are, which is how Moses told him to do it, Moses being the smart guy that he is, Moses being the one who had already tried to lead these wayward people for quite a while, probably could see the inevitability that they would need to be reminded again who they are. Joshua decides to take them up on the mountain and bring out the law and read it to them. Because at that point, that is what they had. The thing that they had to turn to remind them who they are and what they were to be about, were these words that came from God. Now, the thing I love about this description of Joshua doing this is how it's described. It says, if you caught it, it says Joshua read to them the law, the blessings and the curses. Curses, that doesn't sound good. Another way to think about that is Joshua read to them the law. Joshua read to them the law, the benefits of being God's people, and the obligations. They had participated in the victories they've been having, in the benefits of being God's people. They got to watch the wall in Jericho come down. They needed to be reminded of all of the benefits and also the obligations. That we don't get to pick and choose. That if you're God's people, you have to be God's people all of the time. We may think this is something that happened long ago, and we may think this is something that doesn't necessarily apply to us today. But I would say this is one of those places, one of those strong reminders, one of those moments that we probably do even today, even in our lives of churches or in the lives of us as individuals, find a way to make time for ourselves, which is making time to remind ourselves who we are and what it is that we are about. Most everybody I know is very, very busy. Most of us have plenty to do. And there doesn't seem to be an end of everything that needs to be done, even you retired people who are busier than our working people. And you're nodding at me. Yeah, I know how it is. I see how it is. Why would I ever retire? You're not setting a great example, by the way. Like, wow, why would you do that? You just get busier. All right, but that's part of life. We do need to be reminded of who we are in the busyness and Joshua figures out that the only way to do that is to actually stop and take a moment, take some time away, take people to somewhere else, and remind them of who they are. Give them back the vision of what it is to be God's people. Now, as I was reading this, I was reminded of my life before I came here. So many of you know that before I came here to the promised land of Johnstown, United Methodist Church, which really has been great, by the way. No, literally, it has been. I was in the desert of working for the annual conference. I hope the bishop doesn't watch these. All right. It was like wandering the desert for 4 years, not 40, I got to tell you. But one of the things I did enjoy about the time of working, so the annual conference, as you don't know, is kind of it's the organization of all the Methodist churches in the area, and there are some poor souls that don't get to actually work in local churches that have to go work there. And I was asked to do that and did it for 4 years. But one of the things I actually enjoyed doing was I got to work with other churches. We put a process together to help churches, really kind of churches that maybe thought they were struggling or weren't sure what they were going to do, wasn't sure what the next chapter of life looks like. We heard a lot of common complaints from congregations about just not knowing how to work with their neighbors or what they should be even about. And so we put this kind of process together. This church actually participated in that process, but I kind of led the development of that process to give churches something to work through, something to think through, and frankly, something to pray through. How are you being called to be God's kingdom in this place? And one of the things that we gave them, because I am still a former engineer at heart, was a chart. And I think we got the chart here. And so this is what we came with. This is actually based on some really great research that was done about 10 years ago now. It was somebody's PhD study, and it's held up really well. But this idea of life cycle of a church, but really it's the life cycle of any organization, any group you might be a part of. Every time I taught this, they would say, "Oh my gosh, that's not just my church. That's my Rotary Club. That's my Lions Club. That's our Girl Scout troop. Whatever it is." And we're not going to go through the whole thing, and I know you're really disappointed about that. But the chart really charts kind of 4 categories that any organization, group, and I think honestly even person or family, has kind of 4 big things. They have a vision, they have relationships, they have program, and they have management, right? We have management because we have things to manage. We've got buildings, lights to pay, and powers to pay, and snow to shovel, as we heard about earlier, and all this kind of stuff. We have to manage. We have programs, we have things that we do. Right? We have Sunday morning, and we got Sunday school and VBS and Bible studies. We got things that we do. We have programs. The other thing we have is we have relationships. We have the people we're sitting next to or the people we're chatting with online, the friends that we've made, new and old. We provide opportunities to help people build new relationships. It's not just about the cookies after church, guys, though the cookies are great. It's time to get together and reconnect, and the idea of relationships. And then finally, and really actually beginningly, we have this idea of vision. Now, it's interesting in the life cycle of the church, when something starts, when you first start something, and the other thing I got to do is I got to help people who wanted to start brand new churches. When you start something new, you don't have anything except for one thing. You have a vision for what it is that you want to do. And I could almost tell from the beginning whether a project had a chance for being successful or not, and it was always related to how strong the vision was for what it is they wanted to do. The people who came to me and said, oh, there's this place over here where we don't have a church and we think there should be a church there. I'll give you a hint. That's not really a strong enough vision for doing that work. Now when somebody say, hey, there's this group of people, or there's this need, or there's this thing that isn't being met, or there's this opportunity to be part of God's kingdom in this place to do this work that nobody else is doing, and I'm excited and fired up about that, that is a vision that can get somewhere. I talk a lot about my friend Ryan and his wife and their community they set up called Free, and it's probably the most successful project I had, partly because Ryan's such a good guy, but partly also part is they had a really, really strong vision for what it is they wanted to do. They wanted to create a church community, a faith community, a kingdom-loving community for addicts, loved ones of addicts, and spiritual refugees, a group that had been chronically underserved in their part of the world. That was a vision people got behind. And even though at the beginning all they were doing is meeting in their backyard because that's all that they had, that was enough. So over the life cycle of the church, something that seems to what happens over time in the life cycle church, or really any other organization, is you have to take on things like programming and management and all that stuff. And if you kind of follow the curve around, you'll see the thing that kind of gets lost in all of the thing that kind of gets that can kind of drop off, and the thing that we start to walk away from and stop reminding ourselves of is the vision. The vision of who we are and what we're doing. The relationships and the program and the maintenance, and especially eventually the maintenance or the management takes over and takes up more and more time. Which is why we need to take time every once in a while and take a step back and maybe withdraw to somewhere else and remind ourselves of the vision of what it is that we're doing. Because the truth is, for any group, person, whoever, who finds themselves slipping down the other half of that slope, the path back isn't just to go back up the hill. The path back is to go back to the vision, establish that, understand what that is, discern what that is, where is God calling you now, and then build again from there. We're going to talk about what it is to rebuild. First, we must know what it is that we're building, what it is that we're about, and what it is that we care about. It can be hard. I watched many churches struggle with this. Some churches struggled with it because they were so far down that other side of the curve that they didn't feel they had much left to work with to get them back to the beginning. Some churches that I worked with were actually more towards the top, and we're having such a good time, and we're doing such good stuff, and had everything going on so well. They were busy doing good work, and good work was being done, that it was hard to take the time to step back and remind themselves what it is they were about. That is the situation Joshua finds himself in this story. Things are actually going pretty well for God's people. Yeah, they screwed up, because that's what they do. But they came back and they had victory again. If you keep reading, you'll find that God's people will continue to do and continue to be blessed and continue to take advantage of all the benefits of being God's people moving forward. They will continue to have victories moving forward. But Joshua here, before it gets too exciting, before they get too full of themselves, Joshua decides to take a time and say, hold on, let's remember who we are. Now, as a church here, like this actual place, we have had a tremendous number of victories in the last couple of years. We have had multiple times where we have been witness to people stepping up and stepping out in new ways. People being able to rethink, how do we do the things we care about in the way and the circumstances we find ourselves in now? We've seen nothing. I have honestly, in this place, have seen nothing but victory after victory after victory, rethinking and reimagining, rebuilding under the circumstances we find ourselves in that feel very, very different than where it was before. And so I was surprised, personally surprised after all of that, and looking back on all the good that is done, how I was feeling. Recently, I know the pastor was asked to talk to the Association of Retired Clergy, a happening bunch, right? Clergy just can't not organize, is what I've decided, because they basically organize themselves. This was not anything anybody set up, but a group of retired clergy said, he's like, you know what we need? We need an association of retired clergy. We can get together and we can have meetings and take minutes. It'll be great. Sure. Sounds lovely. Anyway, but they have these meetings and they meet on Zoom and that kind of stuff. And they had called me and another guy, and they're like, could you come talk to us about like how things are really going? You know, because they knew what was going on in their little churches or what was going on in their lives. But like, how's it going? Like, you know, all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, sure. Like, what do you want to know? And they're like, well, we want to talk to some place where things, you know, seem to be going okay. And I'm like, okay. And we finally was like, oh, you want some hope? Like, yes. I'm like, oh, okay. So they found a couple of us, and I'm like, well, that's fine. So we got together, and we talked to them about, like, things that were going on, and some of the stuff we were doing here, and and my friend shared about stuff happening in his church, and all that kind of stuff, and we got a lot of nods and smiles and stuff, and they were just like, oh, man, thank you for doing this. All we're hearing is so much doom and gloom out there, and all we're hearing is from people who just, like, they're constantly like, oh, everything is terrible and awful, and I'm like, yeah, I don't talk to those people. Or really, let's be honest, they don't talk to me, right? They don't want to hear it. You know, they don't want to hear it. So, and I had that conversation, and it was a really interesting conversation, and it was actually kind of fun and enjoyable, and I got to the end of it, and I'm like, and it was a wonderful opportunity to sit back and look and think about what has really been going on, what's been going on, and it was a time to kind of take stock. Like, yes, things have happened. God has moved here. God has moved us into new places. Victories have happened. That's a good thing. And then the next thought I had is, then why am I so tired? Why am I so worn out? Why, if I can look back and see how God has been moving in this place and the Spirit has been moving in this place, am I struggling in my own spirit because I was? Why, if I get to be the one who is part of the place people look to and say, oh, that's where the hope is, why wasn't I feeling that hope? And it was shortly after that an opportunity came up, and it was the opportunity I took last week, which is to go on renewal leave. In the church, pastors are allowed a 1 week a year of renewal leave, where we get to go and do something. And so I got invited by a friend, and some of you, if you follow me on Facebook, know where I was, but I got invited by a friend to come and take over a spare room that they had rented at no cost to us in Hawaii. Never been there. Thought it sounded great. And I will tell you, the thing that always fascinates me is, like, if you tell somebody you're going somewhere, especially if you tell them like online or on Facebook, how much like unsolicited like travel advice you'll get. Like if you tell them like, well, you got to do this and you got to do this and you got to do this, and I'm like, man, if I do all that stuff, I'm just going to be running from place to place to place. That's not why I need to go. That's not what this is about. It's not about seeing all the things. Someday I'd like to go see the things, right? But no, I didn't see Pearl Harbor, and my swimsuit stayed in the bag the whole time. Did. I had one person's post actually said, make sure you eat where the locals eat. And I happened to see that while I was sitting at a traffic light, and I'm like, well, that's where all you could see like all these like cars that were very clearly like work cars, like they weren't from the Hertz lot, right? So there's all these like work trucks and everything else like that. They were all lined up. I'm like, oh, I got to eat where the locals eat. I'm like, oh, great. They're all lined up at the drive-thru at Arby's. I succeeded in that one. I ate where the locals ate. All right. What I did was I took a lot of walks, read some books, sat out on the patio, and what I realized, what I needed, I needed to remind myself of the vision that I have. The vision I have for my life and the vision I have for my life here. What it is that I'm about, what it is that we're about. And so I spent a lot of time thinking and praying and contemplating what that might be and who it is that we are. And I realized in many ways we already know. It's not really that the vision had changed. It's more that I had just lost my hold on it. The visions for God's people hadn't changed. Joshua's concern, God's concern, is that they were going to lose hold on it. Because God's people were not intended and should not be and were not supposed to be conquerors. They were supposed to be the people of the land that God promised them. And there's a difference. So God needed to remind them of the vision that didn't change, so they did not get swept up in all the other things they could get swept up in. I needed that moment. I needed that time and opportunity to remind myself of what it is that, frankly, I already knew about who it is that we are, what it is that we care about, and what it is that my role here is. And I feel very blessed. It definitely was a benefit, and it was a blessing to get that opportunity. I think we all need those opportunities sometimes. We all need that little moment away, whether it's an hour or whether it's a week, whether it's 3 time zones to the west or just up into the mountains. Whatever it is, we need that little break, that little time to ask the question, what is it I'm doing? Why is it that I'm here? God, what is the vision you have for me? And I think we can do it in the same way that Joshua did, by taking people to another place and reminding them of God's words. The words that we would read today, these many thousand years later, are probably different than the words that Joshua read to those people then. Because while the Old Testament is certainly part of our book, there's a new book that we added. There are new words from God that mean something to us, and in fact probably need to mean the most of us. So I want to give us an opportunity. We don't do this much. In a moment, Kimberly's going to play for us a little bit. We're going to have a video that plays that I shot actually while I was there. I'm going to invite you to just watch the video, or if you want, close your eyes. Up to you. But put yourself in a moment. Try to, if you can, open your heart and mind. And I will share with you some of the words that we have today that help us remind us who we are. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called God's children. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. In everything, do to others as you would have them do to you, for this is the law and the prophets. Everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like the wise man who built his house on rock. The rain fell and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat down on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act on them will be like the foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was its fall. Words from Jesus Christ in the Sermon on the Mount, reminding his people who they are. We are not people of the beach, but we are people of the mountain, people of the rock. The thing that I needed to be reminded of is what we all already knew, is that we do have a vision for who we are and who we want to be. We are the people that proclaim. We are called to love God, love neighbor, and love ourselves. We are the people who proclaim that God loves each and every one of us exactly how we are, and God is challenging us to become more. And we are the people who proclaim, who confess that we cannot do everything. So we strive to do something. We love, we become, we do. It is as simple and as easy as that. When we are about that work, we are about God's kingdom, and we are about being God's people. When we have that in front of us, we have the vision for who we are in our hearts and in our minds. We are the people like those folks so long ago. We will have victories, and we will have setbacks. And in all of it, God will be with us, because we are about God's work. Let us all be reminded of the vision we have of being who we are together. And let us all give ourselves permission to take the time we need to reconnect with the vision God has for us. Because only then can we do the work we are called to do. Amen.